Namaskar, welcome to Wide Angle with Ashok Vyas. Every day is special and you are very special and every breath is special. But many times we just forget that breathing is such a wonderful gift given to us. Life, such a precious, what would you say? Precious, life is precious. But we forget that many times. If you don't believe me, I'm happy that you don't believe me. But I've seen many people when they stress out and they feel why this is happening to me, then they get into some mode of finding their equilibrium at wrong places. How we should stay focused at the glorious aspect of life. We have the pleasure of interacting on mental well-being with someone who is dedicated to literature, not only by reading and writing, he is also someone who has interacted with young minds for almost 3 decades now. Professor Sanjay Patel, Professor of English, actually joins me today. Namaste.
Namaste.
So, let me bring the context. We hear many cases where young minds are found to be drawn towards drugs. And one such case is catching highlights these days in India. But to talk to me about, based on what you have read in literature and the way you have seen your own mind during those formative years, what is the pull for these things which when we sit on a high pedestal we say these are vices like alcohol, drugs, etc.?
The attraction for drugs, actually, I'm glad you brought it up because we're seeing it's a rampant issue amongst the young people, and it's little by little it's spreading into adult community as well. The drugs have been for young people a lot about acceptance. So there's peer pressure. Right? So many times a lot of them succumb to the peer pressure just to be fitting into a community and not be outcasted. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect I've observed is that many of them use drugs in a sense of escapism. As you had mentioned, the level of stress can be so overwhelming, pressure from all sorts of, all institutions, from education pressures, parental pressures, and just the pressure to succeed and achieve something. So they need a vent, and many of them don't try to find vents that are constructive and positive, maybe through counseling or therapy, or even if we try to go further, into meditation. So they use drugs as a form of escape. And they use various types of drugs which actually promote certain states of mind, which is understood, but at the same time, it also works negatively toward their, their own abilities, and it creates an addiction, as we all know. And it is a problem with the young minds, especially today. And there's a fight and more attempt to make them legalize. Right? So that is a big concern.
No, when you are saying legalize, I think that is slightly different. Probably that comes from the medical point of view. They say that this particular drug is helpful in some way to cure from a particular disease. I'm not familiar with the biological aspect. But when they legalize it, it is not that they are looking at legalizing it for the kind of
recreation,
escape or recreation. That's my understanding.
In the beginning stages, we've seen with, like, for example, with the marijuana drug, it's used for medical purposes, but gradually over time, it has changed over to recreational use. And that is an issue that we have to deal with. And it's funny you brought that up because in the recent book we were reading in school, which deals with Aldous Huxley's totalitarian system of Brave New World, in which drugs were used in a form to control the citizens, right? So there was a rampant amount of drugs given just so the citizens can be subdued, but to deal with stress. So if this is a mechanism, we've seen cigarettes use alcohol during the prohibition, right? There was a lot of issues, but then it was lenient and allowed to be used, and we saw the effects of it. So we're seeing that these drugs are also now a way for the young people to perhaps calm them down, to find roots of escapism from other types of issues they've been facing in life.
Okay, so now let us face life directly. When I say face life directly, meaning we want everyone to be happy and healthy, happy in a healthy way actually. So in order to be happy in a healthy way, if we are clear about our priorities, as well as if we are clear about what will happen as a result of what I am doing. Which means if I'm getting into drugs, then how it is going to affect my system, my mind, my thinking, my standing in the society, as well as my march towards my success. So there are multiple related factors which, if one is clear while they take or they think about taking this step, so how that clarity can become a part of the thinking process of not just young mind, for anybody. And maybe you can relate to how literature also helps us in some way.
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. I mean, the greatest drug in the world would be an addiction to reading. I mean, if it would, in fact, Emily Dickinson, she's a poet. She had mentioned many times that
inebriated with the dew am I. Is that Emily Dickinson?
Yes. She's a transcendental poet, and her thinking had a lot. She herself had mental issues with depression, but she never used drugs as a form to deal with the depression, which is unique. She used a different type of vent, a different type of therapy. She used writing, and she said the best form of dealing with any kind of mental neurosis or mental problems is literature. Literature helps us to deal with this rather than going. And she called poetry food for the soul. I mean, how much it can actually transform us from inside, remove the addiction to the material aspect, and focus now on internal. So that's what she was looking at.
Since you bring Emily Dickinson, so I'm just reminded of character of someone who we respect as an author, or the way he played out his cards in life, and the words that we see in the form of maybe fiction or essays, etc. Do you see, as a reader, it makes a difference to you while you seek inspiration, that was he living his own or her own words?
I'm glad you brought it up. You know, it becomes really relevant that when authors, when they expound their thinking and their philosophy on paper, it would be more powerful, obviously, if we saw it in their lives, but there's many times a contradiction between what's on paper, their ideology, and then the way they live their life. It's very rare to find where we see a combination of both. But if they're in the process of at least applying their life, which we can say for Socrates, he never wrote anything. His students, Plato, they're the ones who wrote for him. But we can see the practice and the implementation, and therefore we can see the transformation, we can see the radiance in the behavior, and it gets passed on to their students. When we see a dichotomy, which we have seen many times between author, like perhaps like Tennessee Williams, okay, and then in their writings, the writing the material they write, it lacks a sense of spark. It lacks a sense of spirit. It will just convey perhaps their own neurosis on paper, and then when the reader reads it, the neurosis can be unconsciously picked up by the reader, which can be worked in adverse effects. So we want to see the high philosophy practice in their life. That way, when we read it, we can actually imbibe it properly.
Actually, when I say actually, I'm reminded of some of the classic authors who we revere, and their words were very powerful. They almost reached to the stage of oneness amongst all beings through their words. But their personal life was not a flow of integrated personality. They did slip here and there, and so I don't know. So I'm kind of thinking loudly with you that perhaps as a reader, we need to disassociate, and as the probably the word was used by Milton, where impersonalization in the poetry. So that as an artist, we should look at the author and take what helps us to move towards the positive direction, right, rather than see the reflection of how he lived his life. So if I may clarify a little bit more with your permission, so everybody is practicing to reach the perfection, and they look at the map and they creatively express it. But if they fail to follow that map, it doesn't mean that we should not respect the authenticity of the map if Sanjay may realize something which he might have not realized through these words. You see where I'm leading to?
Absolutely. I mean, the perfect example is Thoreau. He was actually, in some sense, protesting the government system in many ways, certain taxations that they were implementing. So he said, in order for him to actually practice what he wrote down on paper, the protest, he said, I'm going to live in Walden Park in Connecticut. He actually decided to have a small cabin, live what we call outside of the grid of that time period. And he actually showed how an individual can survive on, be self-reliant and live on his own. And that's where we get his essay of self-reliance. So when they practice it and they see it in their life, it's implementation. And when we read it, we can actually understand how they did the actual work, step by step, right? As we know, and when we talk about oneness, I mean, the greatest oneness obviously is Krishna Bhagwan when he gives the Gita to us, right? We see it in his life, and we see it when he recites the Gita for us.
So I was also reminded of Walt Whitman's grass. What is that?
Leaves of grass. Yeah.
Huh? Leaves of grass.
Leaves of grass. Yeah.
So that poetry is almost taking you to the sense of beautiful, harmonious oneness. But he himself faltered in several ways. So still, when you are reading the poetry, maybe you can get that higher stage of consciousness, higher level of consciousness. But now coming back to the point from where we started, if you hear some kids getting drawn towards drugs due to the peer pressure, of course there are several groups, they are also helpful, but if we can prevent them from experimenting with drugs, in what way literature is helpful, and do you see a lot of new literature which is coming up which they can relate as a part of their own lives?
Yeah, in fact, I've seen many study groups that are being created, and in therapy sessions where there are especially teenagers that are involved who have some type of addiction to the drugs, the therapy groups, they actually give students many self-help type of books, and they all read it together. These books actually show mechanisms and strategies, how to take step-by-step approach, how to gradually forego the addiction to the drugs. But the main thing is that the literature today, as you said, the literature today perhaps is more in the sense, it's too narcissistic in my opinion. It's more about the individual and his problems. But the self-help books do provide an outlet. But in the classical literature, okay, they looked at the conditions of society, the conditions of the political state of society, and they showed how an individual can be part of it and still come and rise up many times. Whereas today's literature, it just focuses on myself, my problems, and just like it's a type of ventilation on a level of memoir, okay? But the self-help books do show how to rise up, and I've seen many of them show them strategies how to do it. Especially with the first one is that to build the self-esteem of the individual. Today, the students, I'm seeing more and more, their self-esteem is lost. We talk about Generation X, Generation Y. It's almost become a generation of lost in the sense of they are completely have no direction, very little goals. So they really need a foundation, and the foundation is that they need an anchor to guide them, some type of goal. They don't have goals, so they use the drugs as a form of escape.
So what you said takes me back to several decades where I was a student, and we used to have debates on the need to have a role model. I think that is still relevant. And from that point of view, do you think we as a society have not succeeded in giving the young minds the kind of role model which they can relate to, and they can develop the kind of passion to think beyond their own self-centered not all, but if there are some who just think about themselves, like when we are too much self-centered and we are only thinking about me, that also results into a kind of narrow vision, and it leads to frustrating space. In order to stay away from that, what can be done and what is being done?
The problem with the role model, and it has become a problem, the institutions that provide role models today for young minds has been music, sports, and celebrity. And unfortunately, in these institutions, the role models themselves don't have high thinking, high value. Their aspirations are primarily for status, for fame, and for wealth, which is all good. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But if we want to cultivate a society in which we can climb higher in a sense of integrity, okay, sacrifice all of these types of qualities that we want to develop, we do need those with higher role models for the boys and for the girls. Certain traits that the woman role model would have, certain traits that the man role model would have, so that they can aspire to reach them. Right? From a Western perspective, many of my students who are Christian, and I try to bring it into the classroom, they have Jesus Christ, Martin Luther, and I try to bring literature that actually appeals to them in that sense. And for the Asians, I try to bring literature that deals with from the Chinese perspective, Confucius, Lao's Tzu, and I bring in some parts of India from Gandhi's life as well. So they have different dimensions, and to get away from the current status of role models, which is the music and the sports. But we want them to have role models that are spiritually based, social based, and also political, who have done to make transformations in society.
So now we are almost near the concluding part, and what you said also reminds me of a great artist that we have seen and experienced in our lifetime, Michael Jackson. But the way his last stage, and when you see the last few years of his life, it is painful for some people who have looked up to him like, yeah. But now they have to figure out a way to do not discredit his contribution as an artist. So that is what I was telling you with reference to teachers. So we need to connect with the positive side of everything, whether it is literature, whether it is a human being, whether it is a work of art. And as we look at the world where we are, the question of clarity about our priority comes again and again. And from that point of view, when there is a sense of confusion whether I should do this or I should do that, and there is no clear guiding light to sort of to walk on the path of light, that actually makes it even more difficult. From that point of view, there are some young minds who are also designing their life in a disciplined way. So now my question to you is, any success, whether it's a sports or music, sometimes your passion itself makes you a disciplined person. You are not even making an effort to be disciplined, but you are disciplined. You are constantly working on it. You're in your craft, in your art, or your sports, etc. So talk to me about, if there is discipline, then that would also prevent the drugs from entering into the dimension of your zone. So how do you see discipline as an important ingredient to lead a life which is commendable?
It's a great topic, because we're seeing more and more the idea of discipline, or better yet, a structured system, is little by little dissipating. We need to revamp it and regenerate it and bring it back. The way, if currently the education system is moving towards, like, I'll just give an example. We use more videos for Zoom, etc. That structure is not going to help the students particularly because they just come in from the bed and go to the classroom in the Zoom. And then when how much can they really learn? They need the physical contact to be in the classroom. They need the discipline where if there's something that is not done properly, there are some repercussions and consequences. If the students are not getting any type of, we don't say like harsh punishment, but any type of repercussions for what they've done wrong, then they won't grow and learn. They need a structure, that is for sure. They need a structure of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m., whatever the structure is. They need a 45-minute classroom session. They need a teacher in front of them, not a Zoom camera or a robot in the future, an AI in the future. They need to read literature. They need to read books rather than reading excerpts of books. This part of the structure, which has been little by little diluted, has to be rebrought again. And the most important thing is they also structure, which from home as well, so that can be reinforced from the educational perspective.
So reinforcing something to keep it going is important, and somewhere one should not think that there is a point of no return. You can always bounce back. And that spirit helps if you are feeling low or you're sliding down. And that spirit is also inculcated by your friends and well-meaning professors like Professor Sanjay Patel, or well-meaning books which helps you see the broad side of life. And as we conclude our conversation, if I request you to dive deep into your own personal treasure of any book which you felt was very, very inspiring for you, and leave Bhagavad Gita aside because I know that is there for you, but some other book.
Sure. There's a book called Barefoot in Athens. It's by Anderson is the author, and it is the life of Socrates. And he actually depicts how Socrates had, come against the challenges of society, and he actually, what he did to teach his students, and he overcame family challenges, his personal challenges, and the political challenges. And he shows how we can rise above difficult, and he showed how to live a disciplined life as well. So that's one book. And my other book that I have two actually. One is by Hermann Hesse, it's called Siddhartha. And he Siddhartha.
Yeah. I can think I can wait.
Yes, I can wait. And obviously I teach that every year because I want the students to understand that there is a way to come out of the vicious cycle that we're living in. And when we read Siddhartha, and when we read Barefoot in Athens, they see two different perspectives. It's not just from Asia, but there's one also from the European or Western tradition. So two people who have come and rose up.
Wonderful. So in the last response on the question about inspiring book, Professor Sanjay Patel has left a wonderful treasure trove for us. So Barefoot in Athens will take us to the life of Socrates, and that will be a great experience, as well as the Siddhartha, which I have also read, is a great book. And as we conclude, I want to recollect one couplet with you, Professor Patel, and that is probably by Neeraj, or mostly Neeraj. Tu zinda hai, to zindagi ki jeet par yaqeen kar. तू जिंदा है तो जिंदगी की जीत पर यकीन कर, अगर कहीं है स्वर्ग तो उतार ले जमीन पर. So on that note, let's see the beauty and brightness of life with love and harmony. Wishing that for one and all. I'm thanking you with as I say, from the bottom of my heart to stop by. And it's indeed a memorable conversation for several reasons. So thanking you and thanking all of you for being with us. This is Ashok Vyas. Namaste.